So we're going to have the senators up here. Can we get the screen going, please?
Senator Gillibrand, Senator Lummis, thank you so much for being with us. I know we don't have much time, so I want to jump right into it. What has been the reaction to the Responsible Financial Innovation Act? In particular, can you tell us what portions of it have received the most support and which ones maybe are people still mulling over or not so enthusiastic about?
Well, I think the response so far has been terrific. We spent a lot of time talking to industry participants, to advocacy groups, to regulators, and we've put together what we thought was a really good framework, a baseline bill for people to begin to debate, discuss, and enhance. And so far, people are pretty pleased with it. The Ag Committee's already taken up their portion, which is the commodities piece, and they've put out a draft bill that really reflects our draft almost entirely, with maybe a few changes. That bill is going to be marked up, and we are going to begin to hopefully debate it, and then maybe get a vote by the end of the year, which will be the cornerstone of our bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great, and it is great that the two of you teamed up, given that you are on the Ag Committee and Senator Lummis, you are on the Banking Committee, and that of course spans the jurisdiction that we have here. And your legislation is a comprehensive approach. Tell me about the reaction in the executive branch. What's been the reaction, first of all, from the SEC and from Chair Gensler?
We've been in touch with him and kept them informed as this draft has evolved. We think that there may be some minor changes to the definitions in the bill. We know that the attention has been placed on using the Howey test, which most people approve of, but they're wondering what cryptocurrencies fall on which side of the Howey test, whether it's a commodity or a security. So I think that will continue to be something that is discussed as we go along. But our draft is not only very comprehensive in that it covers commodities, securities, as well as banking instruments and cybersecurity. It is divided among 3 or 4 committees jurisdictionally here. And so to have one part of it move, the part that Senator Gillibrand mentioned that's moving through the Ag Committee, go first, does give us an opportunity to begin to show people the different pieces of this bill and how they can pass separately, but eventually be put together into one comprehensive piece.
Well, let's maybe talk about the ag-centric part a little bit. You are giving more authority to the CFTC, my former agency, and other people have suggested we need a federal regulator of the spot market. What's been the reaction of the CFTC?
Very positive. The chairman spoke in front of our hearing where we discussed the bill. He thought the principles of our bill was exactly right. His staff worked on the ag piece specifically. So we have a lot of consensus. People generally believe Bitcoin is a commodity. Many believe that Ether and perhaps others have the indicia of a commodity, to be sufficiently decentralized, to have no longer a centralized issuing agency or agent. It really matters, the purpose of any digital asset and how it's being used to determine, based on the Howey test and based on case law, about which is a commodity and which is a security. And I think to Senator Lummis's point, we sat down with Chairman Gensler and offered, please give us line edits. We are open to these kinds of suggestions, because he just didn't want the regular banking industry to be subsumed in our bill. And obviously that was never our intention, nor would we want to do that. This is specific to digital assets, to a new class of assets that need to be regulated. We want safety and soundness, transparency, accountability, basic consumer protection, and we think our legislation does that.
Well, let me follow up on the issue of stablecoins. Your proposal provides for banks to issue stablecoins. Other proposals have said we should allow non-bank issuers and even perhaps state-licensed banks. How do you feel about that? Would you support legislation that would provide for non-bank issuers of stablecoins, subject, let's say, to some regulatory framework?
Yes, I would support allowing non-banks to issue stablecoins as long as they are 100% backed by hard assets.
We're not talking about algorithmic
Right.
ones here. Let's leave those
Exactly
aside.
right. In fact, our bill would actually prohibit algorithmic stable coins that have no hard asset backing.
And how about state banks?
Well, I would like to see state banks have
'Cause
that.
Wyoming has obviously done a lot of creative things there.
Exactly. And I'm a supporter of the dual banking system.
In terms of those Treasury and White House reports, did you have any other particular reactions to them? Do you think they're helpful to the process? Were there things in those reports that you didn't agree with, or were there things that they left out of those reports in terms of, they talk about central bank digital currencies, a little bit about the consumer protection issues, illicit finance. What was your reaction to all that?
Well, for me, it's been nice to have some comments from the executive branch so we can see if we're totally off base or whether we're thinking along the same lines and can start working together to refine any slight disagreements.
Yeah, I think it's been productive, and I think the more smart minds that really think about how you create rules of the road for this industry, it's very helpful. Yeah. There's not that much expertise developed yet in the Senate and the House. There's certainly certain senators and House members who are very well informed, but overall it's not something people have working knowledge on. So having the White House take the time to ask for these studies, ask for the research, ask for opinions is very important. Some of the areas where Cynthia and I did not find consensus within the industry, we left for studies. So whether we wanted to have a centralized bank currency, that's something that we left for a study specifically because the digital yuan creates a number of concerns, like whether it's being used for intelligence gathering versus a more benign use. Those are the types of things we want studied so that when the United States decides if we do this, how we do this, who's eligible, who has access, it's informed. And so we really like how we ended up with a couple of areas to leave for studies, like, for example, DeFi. We have specific provisions in our bill to say DeFi has extreme potential for augmenting access to capital for underserved groups. It's extremely effective for people who want to send remittances. It's extremely helpful for countries that do not have steady or certain centralized banking available to people. And so we want that to be really studied and carefully reviewed about how do you provide the transparency and accountability so that DeFi can function effectively to meet these goals.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the level of understanding of these issues. Obviously, the two of you have spent a lot of time getting educated. Some other members have. But as you said, a lot of members don't know that much. How's that going to affect this process?
I think it affects timing most of anything because not everyone's ready to have an opinion because they haven't studied it enough. And so what Senator Lummis and I really focused on is just encouraging the committees to start their hearings, do a markup, create some legislation, work on a bipartisan basis, see where the consensus is on a committee by committee basis. The Ag Committee's already done their work and they're on that way to getting a markup and doing the work and maybe passing their piece. I also sit on the Intelligence Committee. I've talked to the chairman about having hearings and beginning to say, how do we create safety and soundness from the cyber perspective? Our bill suggested that to develop those rules that they work with NIST because NIST has much more experience in cyber protocols and a basic certification of what's secure enough. And so we really want Intel to do their work. We've met with the chairman of banking. Cynthia's on banking. We hope banking might take up stablecoin first. It's the kind of thing that has a lot of consensus. So our job is just to encourage chairman and other members to take on the issue, learn it, and begin to have things like hearings.
The crypto industry has become bigger, more powerful, and much more politically active. Does that concern you? Does it concern you as to how that will affect the process of doing the right thing?
I've actually invited them to become more politically active because they're so knowledgeable about what they're doing now and what innovations they see coming. Because we're trying to find in this bill the sweet spot between allowing innovation to continue to occur in this country, but having adequate consumer protections and a well-understood framework of regulation.
On the consumer protection point, we've obviously now gone through a period where crypto prices fell dramatically from last November. Hundreds of thousands of people had losses. How has that affected your thinking about what we need to do?
It just emphasizes how important this regulatory framework is now. We need to create basic rules of the road so that consumers know what's safe and what's not safe. Right now, there's no
Do
regulation.
you feel there's a lot of, sorry to
Or
interrupt.
very little regulation. And so people may go into these industries not knowing anything, and they may not have the advice or guidance from a professional about what they're doing. And so they may lose money. There's also many digital currency, digital assets, different tokens that may not be legit. And so one of the SEC roles is going to be to start regulating the digital assets that are being offered to raise money and are securities under the Howey test, and make sure they're offering things that are honest and true, that they're not committing fraud. So it just puts a point on how important this legislation is now.
The Treasury report on the implications of crypto for consumers, investors, and businesses basically says this is an industry rife with scams and fraud and hacks and manipulation. Would you agree with that characterization?
There's many parts of the industry that is not safe and that is fraudulent, but that's why we want to pass this legislation, because it says you need to be either registered as a commodity and have to be regulated by the CFTC, or you have to be registered with the SEC, or you're under the OCC if you're a stablecoin. So it tells consumers and participants what their regulatory obligations are. And so it just creates the possibility of much more stability.
And by not having regulations, we put the onus on, for example, the SEC to go out and regulate by enforcement action. So you have firms trying to navigate this Wild West and then getting their hands slapped when the regulators think they do have adequate existing regulations to engage in an enforcement action. I think everybody would rather know up front, what are the rules of the road? If you custody money with someone, does the money custodied belong to the custodian, or does it belong to you? These are some unanswered questions in the regulatory environment that make it hard to navigate, and it makes it confusing to consumers.
The other day, Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan, basically said Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme and cryptocurrencies are Ponzi schemes. Now, he distinguished those from blockchain technology generally, and even from stablecoins, which he said, those could have utility, but he basically referred to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as not having any utility. Would you agree with that characterization? And does that mean we should think about regulation differently in those two areas?
Well, I view Bitcoin as digital gold. It is a long-term asset. So the way I view it is more of a buy and hold strategy, so you can realize value over time. People who are trading it, almost day trading among cryptocurrencies, I think are taking a tremendous risk. And for people that know how to manage that risk and are professionals, there may be a tremendous upside. But for average investors who are dabbling with these assets for the first time, I say buy a little, hold it, and learn about it and see how it behaves. But don't go into it with the notion that you're going to be a short-term trader. You're going to get bit.
I think this is a global industry. There is so much innovation in this space and so many uses. I think for America not to regulate it means that we will allow these industries to go overseas and continue to exist, but without the enormous growth opportunity for these businesses to grow and thrive here. We have the best financial markets in the world. We have markets that have certainty. We have the best regulators. But as you, as a former CFTC chairman, can figure out how to regulate Bitcoin under your own jurisdiction, I'm certain the rest of us can too. So I don't think any one person's opinion is determinative, because people don't all have the same knowledge base about the diversity of the industry, all the uses and all the applications. And the solution is not to ignore it. The solution is to regulate it, because it will grow worldwide, whether or not we participate. And Americans will want to participate in this market, whether or not we regulate. And so from my perspective, if I have an 18-year-old boy who desperately wants to buy Bitcoin, I want this market regulated. I want smart CFTC chairman, smart SEC chairman, smart OCC chairman to be overseeing this industry, to separate the wheat from the chaff, to make sure that those who are fraudulent aren't participating and are being prosecuted. That's the solution, not put your head in the sand and say it's a bad thing. You have to regulate.
So create a strong regulatory framework
Yes.
and let the market, let investors kind of decide,
Yes.
figure it
And-
out,
and-
which is
and-
the approach
which is
we've taken.
Which is what capitalism
generally.
is all about.
Right.
We
Right.
don't stifle innovation in capitalism. We make sure that innovation can proceed in a safe way. We want to make sure people can continue to grow their industries and their assets and their applications, but we want to do it in a way that customers aren't being taken advantage of.
And that's why we chose the existing regulatory framework and just to lay digital assets on top of it, because we know that the SEC has a very strong record in consumer protection and disclosure. And so if some of these assets are determined to be securities, as I think most of them will be determined to be securities, we know that there's a regulator that already has a firm handle and a mature staff in making determinations and requirements with regard to consumer protection and disclosure.
So you would agree with Chairman Gensler that most of them probably are securities, and I take it your legislation isn't meant to change that.
No, it's just that people didn't read it properly. We just said that there are commodities, and Bitcoin is one of them, and Ether and a few others probably are as well, but that there's a test. It's called the Howey test. It's worked, and we updated it to actually work in the framework of digital assets. And if there's 15,000 cryptocurrencies, that means 14,900 and something are securities. So that's a lot of work for the SEC to do.
And your concept of ancillary assets is not meant to upset that either.
No, it's
sort
just
of
a term of
subcategory.
art. It's just a term of art that then will go through tests to say, are you a security? Are you a commodity?
What do you see as the biggest challenges then ahead in terms of passing a reasonable framework?
Just really informing and bringing members of Congress up to speed so they can make thoughtful decisions about what type of regulatory frameworks they're comfortable with. It's why Cynthia and I thought it was so important to at least introduce this bipartisan, very wide-reaching bill so that people could have a basis on which to consider these decisions. And we're optimistic that each of the committees of jurisdiction will take this up. Whether they can get anything done this year or not, we don't know, but we certainly encourage them to do so.
Well, let me try to put you on the spot on that. 6 months from now, where will we be? Will there be something on President Biden's desk? Maybe not the entire package, but maybe something on stablecoins?
And maybe the commodities section. I think the ag section is ready. Once we have a markup,
So in other words, the ag section, meaning give the CFTC authority over the spot market.
over particularly
Right.
commodities. So
Right.
it's only going to be
Spot
Bitcoin
market of
and
commodities, yes.
of commodities. So
Right.
the rest, Chairman Gensler is doing enforcement actions now, so he's trying to make it up as he goes along, which is fine. But hopefully, through banking, they'll do some hearings and they'll come up with an agenda about what they'd like to pass. So maybe within 6 months, parts of it are passed. That would be great if we had that done within 6 months.
Senator Lummis, what do you think in
Yeah,
6 months?
I agree. I think that as one section starts to move, such as ag has already started, that then you'll see stablecoins go next, and then possibly the SEC governed parts of it, because as it begins to take shape, we can mold it all together as the process goes on. So I think 6 months from now, we actually will see at least part of this on the president's desk.
Okay, and if I were to look at those who voted for it, what percentage are going to be Republicans and what percentage are going to be Democrats, roughly?
I think it'll be widely bipartisan. I bet we get, in the Senate, 60 to 70% will ultimately support regulatory frameworks. There's not a great deal
And evenly divided.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a great deal of opposition. It's just whether or not the individual senators take time to learn it, see how it applies to their state, create thoughtful analyses. I think it's something that could be widely bipartisan. It's not ideologic. It's just let's regulate an industry that is growing in our country.
Right. Senator Gillibrand, Senator Lummis, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your time, and good luck with the legislation.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Hi, I'm David Vandeveer. I'm the new Executive Director here at the Passero Center for Financial Markets and Policy. I want to thank you all for coming. I realize I'm very well aware that I'm the last thing between you and the reception, networking reception. So I just want to take this opportunity though to thank again Mike Passeros and his family. I also want to thank Dr. Reena Agarwal, who's done such a fantastic job of organizing and getting the right people here. Anytime you start thanking people individually, you start having problems. I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank the students who helped out. I want to thank just a few people, Anna Kormis, Lee Pinkowitz, Teresa Mannix, Sammy Kraus, the ProSec team, and again, the students who really helped make this happen today. So thank you very much.